And while there's some benefit to the bullpen environment, there's also some benefit that I think goes unseen in terms of remote. That there are ways to measure productivity for a remote employee today that didn't exist before the pandemic. Technology has circumvented the need for everybody to be face-to-face.
Welcome back to Talent Hunters, where we explore insights and trends shaping the global recruiting and staffing industry. Want to build talented teams that drive your company toward big goals and big growth? Then this podcast is for you. And now, let's join the conversation with today's episode of Talent Hunters, brought to you by HireQuest. Connect with us at hirequest.com.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Vince Holt, the host of Talent Hunters. Today we have Ron Gauthier, founder and CEO of Intelligence, located in Chicago, Illinois. Ron's team offers people solutions that serve middle and lower middle market private equity and venture capital firms and their portfolio companies. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Vince. I'm glad to be here. It's not very often that someone with your experience comes knocking at my door and asks me my opinion, but I will share it nonetheless.
I love it. I love it. It'd be a great discussion. So to kick this thing off, Ron, let's hear a little bit about your background and really what got you to where you are today.
You know, it's interesting because as we were getting ready for the show, I was talking a little, or the podcast, I was talking a little bit about that. You know, I started as a recruiter in an agency. My first job was recruiting physicians, ER physicians for hospitals. And I remember my training in that. My boss handed me a book of doctors and a book of hospitals and said, figure it out. And that was really all the training amounted to back in the day. And I know I'm dating myself now, but you know, you had to focus on relationships. And I learned very early on in my career that the relationship that you have with a candidate and with your client is incredibly important. When you're working with a candidate, whether they want to admit it or not, you have the power as their representative, the recruiter, to change the trajectory of their life. And that was evidenced to me by an interaction that I had with a doctor very early in my career. I moved on and got into technology and spent some time really understanding how to develop high-end client relationships. MasterCard International was one of my first big clients. And I was their Unix systems guy. If there was a Unix, and I don't even know if people use Unix systems anymore. We don't really do much technology, but if there was a Unix system need, they didn't go anywhere else except to me. And so I was very blessed to have really good, solid relationships early in my career. And I managed to, you know, move up in the corporate ranks and ended up running a consulting firm based out of Kansas City. Spent some time there, and then and this was all before I was 28. And then by the time I was 28 or 29, I was in Chicago. And I had the good fortune to work for a man who taught me a great deal, still one of my dearest friends today, taught me a great deal about the business and how to move quickly, because speed is also important in what we do from a recruiting standpoint. So I parlayed those things into some consulting gigs and ended up working a lot for in the legal technology space for companies like Epic and Hewlett Packard and some of the other big name players in that space. I also did a stint with the Department of Homeland Security, where we were helping them federalize airports. And the goal was to hire 100,000 people in 10 months. And so that experience taught me two things. Number one, process is incredibly important. You have to have a good process that executes it. The process can have a lot of steps in it, but as long as it's efficient, which isn't always associated with the government, but when it's efficient, you can move a lot of people through a process very quickly. I've taken all of those experiences. I spent some time as a senior partner here at another firm in Chicago with that same gentleman. I worked for him again. With that same gentleman that I had met in my 20s. And we've remained dear friends to this day. He continues to teach me, which is always good. But I've taken those experiences and I've built it into our organization. And to me, our organization is really focused on a few things: client and candidate centric experiences from a recruiting perspective, meaning I understand that the client is paying the check, but the candidate is a human being too, and has a lot of feelings and a lot of emotions tied to moving themselves from one job to another. Even if they're unemployed, there's a lot of emotion attached to that. We also believe in being very fast and very efficient. And so we utilize technology, things you and I did not have at the beginning of our career. And more importantly, I think what's gotten me to where I am today is understanding that by myself, I can do nothing. I have to have people around me who support whatever crazy vision I've come up with and help me put it into action. I'm a big fan of the book Execution by Larry Bossidy and Rob Sharon. A leader doesn't need to be an expert in everything, but you have to be inquisitive enough to know how to ask the right questions. And that to me, when I trust my teams, when I trust the people who work for me, the sky is kind of the limit in terms of what we can accomplish. I don't know if that 100% answered your question or not, Vince, but I hope it did.
Oh, I mean, it leads us into a path of a great discussion. I mean, I'm one of these
well,
people.
Well, that's my job, right? Is to set them up, right?
That's it. That's right. But my job has never been to have all the answers. My job was always to ask the questions.
Find the answers, right?
And you just coined it perfectly. You really did.
Thank you.
You know, you started this company, Intelligence, and you've been in this world for a long time, but Intelligence is rather new.
Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit in the Reader's Digest form of what is it that cuts you different than your competition?
You know, that's a really good question. It's kind of a loaded question because I believe that we all say the same things. I believe we all say we're faster. I believe we all say we're more efficient, that we're, our screens. And if I look at it simply from a recruiting perspective, that our screens are deeper, right? I think what cuts us different ultimately is the people that we have associated with what we do. I think I mentioned to you before we started recording that I started this business really with the idea of being a lifestyle business. I was going to do a few things. I was going to do talent advisory, so helping stand up talent departments, helping them get better, helping them think more like agency people so that they could be more effective. Agency people are driven. They're a different animal, right? And not all of them succeed in a corporate environment. But if you can embody some of those traits in terms of sourcing and some of the other things that you do, and always being, for lack of a better term, on the hunt, I think sometimes you get a higher quality internal recruiter. They're tasked with so many things that it's hard for them to replicate what we do externally, which is why they still need us. But I really think at the end of the day, it comes down to the people. Teaching people how to do it was great. We still do that today. But in order for us to effectively operate as talent partners, we think of ourselves as talent business partners. What happens if this role doesn't get filled? What happens to your business if this doesn't happen? When we go at it from that standpoint, rather than you've got a role and I want to try to fill it, we tend to buy into it. We tend to be invested in the outcome that happens there. And I think that that's true of everybody that we have on our team today, whether they're doing recruiting, organizational design, culture work. Because as I said, I started this, I was going to do 4 things: talent advisory, HR advisory, and 3 things, and retained search. That was it. And I did that for the first 14 months. And I was very fortunate to have a private equity client here in Chicago kind of pull back the curtain and show me all of the places where there were gaps in human capital. And I knew I didn't have the right answers to solve those problems, but I knew I could find those people because I'm a recruiter at heart. But when I was interviewing people and beginning to bring people on board, it was really important to me that they understood the vision and had the dedication to spend the time necessary, regardless of whether that was included in your hourly rate or not, to deliver a solution to the client. Because at the end of the day, the client matters, the candidate matters, and you have to care about both parts of those. And so if you can't demonstrate that level of attention, it wouldn't work for us as coworkers, right? I don't know if that specifically answers your question or not.
No, well done. Well done. We're over the last 5 years, we've entered into a bit of a conflict, a trilemma, to state it purposely. This conflictive stage of mandated people in the office, working hybrid, working remote. You just authored a paper not too long ago from a CEO's point of view. Talk about that a bit, would you please?
It's funny because I was always an office guy. My first jobs, I can remember, the very first recruiting job I ever had, it was suit and tie. It didn't matter that you never saw anybody. It was suit and tie, and you were in the office and we were in a bullpen, right? And I know you can relate to that, right? You and I have talked about this a little bit. And while there's some benefit to the bullpen environment, there's also some benefit that I think goes unseen in terms of remote. Worker expectations and worker desires have changed drastically since I got into the business. It's not the same as it was before. That doesn't mean that the work ethic has changed. I truly believe that if you hire the right people and you empower them to do the right things, and you utilize and leverage technology in a way that allows you to communicate instantly, then I think you have an opportunity to work remotely. There are some things that are missed when you're not face-to-face all the time. I think it's harder for junior employees, people who are really, really new, to get the mentoring that they require. But I think that there are hybrid variations that companies can come up with. And I think you're seeing this almost across the board. Companies recognize that issue, and they're trying to find ways to, respect and honor kind of worker preferences, while at the same time making sure people still get the opportunity to grow, get the opportunity to interact. And I think you're even beginning to see that there are, we do demographic studies. We look at this stuff all the time. And if you look at Gen Z and boomers, those are the two most closely alike generations of any of them. Whether you're talking about Gen Jones, which is 54 to 65, Gen X, millennials, right? There were significant shifts, but if you look at Gen Z in terms of the kinds of things that they want, it's not that much different than boomers. They're better at saving money. They're better at doing a lot of different things. But they also recognize that technology is an advantage and allows me to work at a quicker pace to free up time for my life. And I don't know that post-pandemic, we're ever going to be able to put that genie back in the bottle completely. I know President Trump just, mandated that federal workers come back or leave. And my guess is you will find people who will fill those jobs. I don't have any political feeling about that one way or the other. Personally, as a CEO, if I look at that job as a CEO, that may not have been the best decision. I think that there are ways to measure productivity for a remote employee today that didn't exist before the pandemic, right? I think that there are ways to look at this and do things, but that, in the case of the federal government, that would require significantly modernizing internal systems. And that's an investment they may or may not want to make. I don't know. But I'm a firm believer that when you give people the latitude to be responsible, 90% of the time, as long as you're a good leader, 90% of the time, those people will do their best to be responsible and make sure that their work is done in a timely fashion. The only rule we have is that as a company at Intelligence is that if we have a meeting, a team meeting, or we need to get together, you make yourself available. The rest of the time, we have checkpoints throughout the week where we say, okay, like on Monday with our recruiting team, I'll give you an example. On Monday, we sit down, we talk about it from a business development standpoint. Who are you going after and why? What are the right roles? We have specific areas that we work in. And then we collect that information. We track it in our CRM. We look at all the things that a person is doing. CRM is connected to email, right? It allows me to see when people are working. And I don't really feel the need to micromanage like that, because what I'm more concerned about is the outcome. What is the outcome at the end of the week? If the outcome is what you said it was going to be, hey, I don't care if you did that in 2 hours or 10 hours. It doesn't matter to me. But if that outcome isn't, then we need to talk about that, and we need to adjust, and we need to get aligned on what's required to achieve that outcome. I'm going to give you my opinion. I'm going to hear your opinion as an employee or as a team member. And then you're either going to make the decision to do it or you're not. Right. And over time, those things show. You can always tell when, as a leader, you can always tell when someone isn't giving their full concerted effort to it. And if that full concerted effort is 2 hours and they get everything done, I don't care. I just don't care. I have other things to worry about than whether, Tim did his work from 8 to 5 or whether he did it from 9 to noon. As long as we're done, you don't miss client meetings and you don't miss scheduled team meetings, the rest of the time is yours, but you've got to produce. Some would argue, and this is the last thing I'll say on this, some would argue that will only get you what's expected. Okay. So to me, the other part of remote work and the other part of inspiring people, because I think that's really what a leader's job is to inspire people to be their best, is to compensate them in a way that makes it worthwhile for them to put in the extra effort. It might mean we take a little less money up front in terms of gross profit, but in the long term, it's going to be a better outcome for our clients. And that's really what drives growth and what drives business down the road.
You bring up, it's always been a challenge since COVID started to me. My experience was first 2 years after COVID, my people had their best years. One of the fallacies that we can fall into, in my opinion, is in our business of recruiting, and I hope you can relate to this, our own worst enemy is us.
100%.
First of all, everything you laid out, okay, is exactly the same as if they were working in-house. If they produce, you're not on them. If they're not producing, you're trying to find a way to help them produce. So really, the picture you painted, right, is exactly the way it was. I think the problem that we have today in the transition, and you answered part of it, is accountability. And to your point, there's a tremendous amount of ways for accountability to help. We can help them get where they are. But in us being our own worst enemies, what I've found is the more successful recruiters are, in-house, out of house, whatever, the more shortcuts they take. Because they're most recruiters, and I'm not going to say all. Well, I had a friend once tell me that percentage, when people quote percentages, it's to justify what they're going to say. Because there's no facts to back them up.
I like that. I'm gonna steal that from you, just so you know.
Well, I stole it. So. But the idea behind it is most recruiters, right, in our business have a set income they need to make. Personally. My father once told me that if you want to make a lot of money, get into sales. If you really want to make a lot of money, get in the commission business. And that's what I found in the recruiting world, is the commission business works great. Ironically, none of my business over my nearly 40 years of recruiting did I ever focus on the money. I only focused on making sure that I delivered when I said I would. And that took, to your point, working candidates. They were the most important person to me if I was on the phone with them. Companies, they were the most important person I could ever have if I was on the phone with them. Because if I made a placement and it failed 3 months later or 6 months later, they're not going to look at the candidate. They're going to look at the recruiter.
Yeah.
So we can be our own worst enemy. Where I challenge you is, how do you train remote people?
That's interesting. We have a very specific process that we go through. And there are checkpoints all along the way at that process that, I may not be involved in day to day, but I can go back and look at, right? So some of our work, we have a very specific presentation style, things that have to be in a presentation that we make to a client. Some people don't want to go to this length, but I've put it in as kind of you got to check this box to make sure you did your job, right? So our ATS is set up to mirror that process. And I can go in and pull reports and look at what someone is doing to know that they are or are not following the process. I think you hit on something that's really, really important, though. I think one of the things that's been lost, and this is probably at the risk of upsetting maybe someone who watches this, but some of what's been lost in our business is that hunger, right? It's never a hunger for cash. It's a hunger to make placements. The cash is a byproduct of making the placement, right? And if you're only focused on being the best, producing the most placements, the most fills, if you're focused on those things, the money generally handles itself. And it's generally more than what you thought you would have made. But I think there's been a move in our economy, and a good friend of mine who used to be pretty high up at LinkedIn once put it to me this way. He said, the gigification of our economy started over a decade ago, right? And in that gigification, it was a piece of work for a set amount of money. And I think that that's changed the thinking of people. If you look at, kind of this push, and I know I'm not getting back to the training piece, I will circle back to that. When you look at this push of online businesses, everybody believes they're going to be a millionaire by running an online business. And some of them do that, right? Some of them are incredibly successful. You can look at the fortunes built by those people. Everybody wants to be an influencer, and they're going to make millions of dollars. They're going to be Jake Paul, or they're going to be this person, or maybe they just have a desire to share their particular viewpoint with the world, and it catches, right? Nothing wrong with any of those things. And I think you can do both. I think you can be driven to make cash by creating opportunities for candidates and companies to come together, if I just boil it down to just recruiting, right? Yeah. So when you talk about training, one of the things that I look for, training to me is easier if I've hired correctly. If I've hired the right person on the front end, training is correct, is easier because it's not as big of a jump. I would never take someone who's been an internal recruiter their entire life, not because I don't think they could be good, but I think the shock to their system of working for commission might be more than they're prepared to deal with, right? There's an old saying, everybody's standard of living rises to whatever their income is, right? So if you make 150, taking 50 for a year while you build your business, your desk, if you will, in the case of, a lot of agencies out there, that's terrifying, particularly if you have a family and kids and all these other things. I totally understand that. So when we're looking to bring a recruiter on board, we want someone who has great experience. Junior person probably doesn't work for us, right? Because we're small and lean, so we don't have that extra time to give you 6 or 8 or 9 months to figure out whether this job's for you or not, right? And we're going to help you along the way, even if you were a junior person, make a placement or two so that you're feeling some success. But ultimately, that drive has to come from within. If you are driven to succeed and you have a passion for recruiting, for the act of recruiting, then the money won't be as big of an issue. Okay. And you can focus on processing candidates the right way. There's a right way to do it. When you take a person, and this to me is actually more critical than training. When you take a person who's not focused on that process, doesn't love that process, they tend, the longer the time goes on between when they start and when they get a placement, they tend to get very nervous towards the end and begin doing what you're talking about, which is taking shortcuts. I'm going to bomb my client with paper to make sure that that person that I'm just going to play the numbers. And it's part of the reason why candidates get frustrated by recruiters, because they don't know what they do. It's part of why clients get frustrated by recruiters, because we're not listening. And I've been guilty of that. Early in my career, I did the same thing, right? But you learn that as long as you are doing the right things, the results will take care of it. To train someone to do that, you need a very specific process, which we have, 6 steps. There are things that check boxes, as I said, and we walk them through that. We'll sit on the phone with them during client calls. I do that pretty regularly. I'll sit down, and if I see they're getting into a spot, I'll be like, well, hey, can I just throw something in here, and then try to get the client to understand where the person is going. We do training, weekly on how to sell, how to handle objections, how to set your weekly plan, because I think that that's a big part of the success in recruiting. Recruiting isn't rocket science. It's not a hard job. It just requires planning and execution. So we teach them how to set up their weeks, how to map out their schedules, how to be stingy with their time, to be really stingy with their time. And that's another thing my good friend who I worked for twice told me. You got to be stingy with your time. You have to know, instead of the client telling you, I want to do this at 3, it's okay to say, I can't do that. I have a meeting at 3, right? Unless 3 is open. But understand that every moment in your day is valuable. One of the things that I try to tell recruiters right at the beginning is, particularly when they start with us, is you have to believe in the fact that every no that you get through email or on the phone pays you something, right? So if you have to do 1,000 calls and the fee's $10,000, you're making, $10 every time somebody tells you no. And if you keep that in your mind and you focus on that, then the tedious parts that make you a good recruiter, constantly sourcing, constantly building relationships, constantly trying to get meetings, constantly trying to fill your pipeline for that role you might need 6 months from now, become less and less arduous for you. That to me is the big training tool. And somebody will either get that or they won't.
I agree. You kind of glossed over.
You waited there for a second. So I was like, and I know I can sometimes be like a fire hose. My teams tell me that all the time. I have a lot of information that comes out of me all at once. So I apologize.
Well, no, you glossed over one little thing that really is profound, and that is your people working remotely. You are still on the phone with them when they're talking to a client and so forth.
Yes. Until we both feel that they're comfortable
exactly
doing this on their own, right? And there are very few times where I want to be in the process with them. But if they need me and they feel like they'll be more comfortable or everything will fall into line, I believe that people learn by doing and by seeing. It's one thing for me to tell you how to handle an objection. It's another thing to see it in real time, right?
Exactly.
I think that that's super important.
And what you've developed and you've taken the working remotely to that next level. And I think if you could somehow, if it was important to you, it was for you to write the paper. If you could take it to another level of educating CEOs of how to bring these people on board in a way that empowers them rather than gives them a job. And you started to demonstrate that because you're on the phone with them. And what you laid out is everything that gets accomplished by them working in your office, you are replicating with them at home.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because I think I mentioned earlier, we utilize technology, right? We if somebody has a question or they're in a situation where they need guidance because they don't know what to do, not only can they get me by text directly, they can email, they can chat, they can talk to our chief of staff, and they'll get me on a meeting with them, right? Or I try to make myself hyper available to people, not just in recruiting, but in every facet of our business. Most founders, I think, struggle, and we work with founder-led businesses, right? Family-owned, founder-led in lower middle market, private equity, family offices that invest in companies. And one of the big stumbling blocks that we see, and we talk about this in our leadership development area of our business, is it's very difficult for a founder to let go. So my natural inclination as a recruiter and a founder is I want to control the process. I want to know what's happening, right? But I think that the best way to let people grow is to give them space, right? I've learned more from failures in my life than I ever learned from any success I ever had, right? It's when something doesn't work and there's a financial, a physical, and emotional pain associated with that, then you go, okay, I'm not going to do that again, right? Zig Ziglar used to talk about this. I don't know if anybody watching right now remembers who Zig Ziglar is, but find new ways to fail, right? Colonel Sanders, the founder of KFC, was personally and corporately bankrupt. I think it was 11 times before he got somebody to buy the chicken in a truck stop, and then look what happened from there, right? So for the CEOs out there and for the people who lead, I think it is incumbent upon you to do two things, really, maybe three. First, when you hire someone, let them know up front that you're there to support. And I don't always say it this way, but not to micromanage. I'm not here to watch everything. I'm going to give you all of the tools. If over the course of that, you run into struggles, then let's talk, right? I'm going to train you on the front end. I'm going to make sure you understand all of the tools that we use. I'm going to make sure you have multiple avenues of support, either through me or other senior people on the recruiting team, or like if, for example, my second in command here isn't really a talent person. She's dealt with it, but we also bring her in for a fresh set of eyes, right? And she has constant conversations with all of our team members so that if I'm missing something or glossing over it, because I'm sure you understand this, having run a large agency, sometimes you just get inundated with things and you forget to respond or something slips through the cracks. I want fail safes in there. I don't want anybody sitting there festering that they don't have an answer or they don't have access to me. I want to make sure that if there's something that needs to rise to my attention, that I know about it, right? So the first responsibility, and we talked about accountability earlier, it isn't just your employee being accountable, it's you being accountable to them. So that's step number one. Give them the space, train them properly on the front end, and then give them that space to do the work. If you've hired the right person who believes in your mission and your vision and the things that you value as an organization, and they know they have access to you, they'll come to you when they have problems. As long as they don't feel like it's going to be a reprimand situation or you're going to look down on how do you not know this, right? Like we sometimes as leaders, we expect everybody to think the same way we do. And that just isn't the case, right? The other thing that I would say that I think is important in understanding and being able to work remotely is that in our day, Vince, if you weren't available to the boss post 6 o'clock, right? Like I can't tell you the number of times I got a call from my boss in one of my first recruiting jobs going, what's going on with this deal? And it would be 9 o'clock. In fact, we called candidates up until 9 o'clock, right? Because we knew evening time was a better time to get them. So that was ingrained in me. That is no longer the case. People want to have a life and they want to have some separation between work and their personal lives. They want to be able to travel when they want to. They want to be able to do the things that make life enjoyable. And I don't disagree with that. I spent years in a suit and tie working from, 7 o'clock in the morning until 9 o'clock at night. And where did that get me? Gray hair, right? Like that's what it got me. And so I almost respect that. But you have to set boundaries and you have to be able to tell people, look, I get it. You want to have your own life, go do your own thing. Here's the expectations that I have of you in this job, and make those expectations reasonable. Don't make them the same expectations that we had when we were first coming up in the business, right? It's not 1985. It's not 1991 anymore. People view work differently. And if you can't evolve to that and then find mechanisms and methods to communicate what those expectations are, you're going to be disappointed all the time, right? To me, it's that simple. It's just be an accountable leader. Think about what it is you're asking someone to do, and then realistically look at how the world operates today. Technology has circumvented the need for everybody to be face-to-face right now. If we needed to be face-to-face, you and I would be sitting in a studio somewhere, right? Taping this on a big thing. Where are you, by the way? I don't even know right off the top of my head.
Washington State.
Okay, so you're in Washington State. I'm in Chicago. We're separated by 2 time zones. And yet here we are in real time talking about subjects that matter to us. We do this exact same thing with our employees.
It's well said. And it's a great way to wrap this up. I mean, you encapsulated everything from hire right, train properly, accountability, and really support. And so I really thank you very, very much for taking the time out of your day. This has been phenomenal. It really has.
I have enjoyed every minute of it. It's I love sharing ideas and I love learning. You brought up some things today that I'm going to sit back and ponder on and go, well, do I have it right or do I not have it right? Right. And I think that a healthy exchange of ideas is always good, whether you agree with a person or not. So thank you so much for the time. I truly, truly appreciate it. And I look forward to staying in contact with you.